A tenant suddenly handing over keys and asking to walk away from a legally binding contract is one of the most frustrating scenarios landlords face. In Pennsylvania, how you handle this depends entirely on knowing exactly where you have the legal leverage to say no and where the law forces your hand. This scorecard shows the 3 pillars you have to check before giving a tenant an answer. If you mishandle an early termination, you immediately absorb the cost of an empty unit and a halt in your rental income. But if you try to strictly enforce a lease without understanding the tenant's exact rights, you expose yourself to civil lawsuits and statutory damages that can exceed the value of the original lease. Looming over both of these risks is the upcoming 2026 Safe Healthy Home Act, which heavily expands tenant protections across the state. To protect your bottom line, we'll separate justified from unjustified excuses, map out Pennsylvania's subletting rules, and prepare for the 2026 shift. By understanding how these overlapping laws work, you can turn a sudden lease break from an emotional legal crisis into a calculated, manageable business decision. This flowchart maps your legal response, starting by identifying why the tenant wants to leave. Everyday life events fall onto the unjustified side of the tree. They might be buying a house, relocating for a job, or moving in with a partner. Under Pennsylvania law, none of these excuses dissolve the contract. The tenant remains legally bound to pay rent for the remainder of the lease term. This fact gives you maximum financial leverage, but actually enforcing that leverage usually requires suing the tenant in small claims court. Pursuing a lawsuit takes significant time, requires upfront filing costs, and demands serious legal effort just to try and collect on a judgment. A far more practical strategy is to keep the dispute out of court entirely by negotiating a mutual early termination fee with the exiting tenant. Collecting a flat fee to cover a month or 2 of vacancy gives you the cash flow you need to rapidly turn the unit over and sign a new paying renter. Having the legal right to rigidly enforce a contract does not automatically make it the most financially efficient choice for your business. The dynamic changes on the other side of the tree, where specific laws override your lease. The first protected scenario is active military duty. The second protected scenario covers victims of domestic violence, stalking, or sexual assault. Finally, a tenant can legally walk away if they can document landlord harassment or a failure to respect their right to quiet enjoyment. To legally break the lease, the tenant must provide you with 30 days written notice alongside a copy of their official deployment orders. If your tenant provides written notice, along with a court-approved protection from abuse order, Pennsylvania law mandates that you release them without penalty. In these justified scenarios, your leverage is gone. You must immediately absorb the cost of the sudden vacancy, with absolutely no financial recourse against the exiting tenant. Absorbing this loss is mandatory. Failing to flawlessly comply with these protections immediately invites federal fair housing investigations and civil liability. This timeline compares Pennsylvania's notice periods. By default, tenants must give 15 days notice for month-to-month leases and 30 days for leases over a year. These windows legally define when an unjustified departure becomes a breach of contract. If you fail to diligently track these communication dates, you can easily waive your right to claim any lost rent. Once the tenant is leaving, you run into Pennsylvania's risky default rule on subletting. It is completely legal and allowed unless your lease explicitly forbids it. Pennsylvania does not require a landlord to mitigate damages. If a unit is abandoned, you have zero legal obligation to search for a replacement tenant. Relying on these state defaults leaves you incredibly vulnerable. Your property could end up occupied by an unvetted subtenant or simply sit empty while bleeding cash. To genuinely protect your cash flow, you must proactively override these default laws by writing restrictive subletting clauses into your lease and actively seeking new renters yourself. The trade-off between negotiation and legal enforcement is about to get much tighter. This chart plots the setup effort of your management strategy against the risk you carry. Traditionally, landlords could scrape by in this bottom left quadrant, relying on low-effort, generic leases and handshake agreements. Under the new 2026 Safe Healthy Home Act, you will lose the ability to simply let a lease expire to get rid of a difficult tenant. You will need to prove good cause for any non-renewal. This shift grants tenants immense leverage during end-of-lease negotiations and sudden exit discussions. Because the 2026 law requires documented evidence for every non-renewal, Landlords who continue to rely on informal management will lose the legal ability to regain possession of their own units. Navigating this newly complex, high-stakes landscape requires you to shift up into bulletproof professional management. Your immediate action item is to audit your lease's early termination and subletting clauses before these 2026 laws take effect. You don't have to decipher these complex regulations alone. It pays to partner with professional property managers who navigate Pennsylvania-specific statutes every single day. Reach out to the team at Trust Art Realty today for a free rental pricing analysis and expert guidance on managing early lease terminations. Ownership in Philadelphia has shifted from a passive investment into a high-stakes compliance operation, where your bottom line depends on the strength of your documentation.